How did you find out about Crossroads?
Well, you know, it's not a long story, but the story goes that I came to Crossroads the first time in probably 69 or 70, and I was doing some volunteer community work. And Crossroads at that point was sheltering a lot of different projects, and this one was called the Drug Crisis Intervention Center.
Hmm.
And so they were taking care of kids that were overdosing, and they didn't have any kind of community treatment at that point. And I was looking for something worthwhile to do, and so I was a volunteer, and I did night shift stuff, and so I was here for 4 hours a night. And Crossroads was where we kids would come in if they were having a drug problem, you know, typically an overdose, or they were thinking it was an overdose, and we would sit and hold their hand essentially. I mean, we weren't qualified counselors or interventionists or anything, we were just hand holders.
Did you have any medical personnel on board?
No, no. We did later, they did later, but this was the first, it was kind of an experimental thing, and then we moved to a place up in downtown Salt Lake, further uptown, and we had this place on, I think it was Edison Street, little garage it was, and people would come there, and the longer it lasted, the more professional it got. Now it's integrated into one of the mental health programs. It was called Community Center for a while, and it's called Community Crisis Center, and then they thought they should take the name crisis out of it. And like all good efforts like that, it kind of, you know, evolved into what it is today. And yeah.
So when you say Crossroads sheltered these organizations, did they actually start? Did it generate
Well,
here?
no, I think the word was out. There was a lot of, you know, this was the mid and late 60s and early 70s, and there was a lot of desire because of all of the, I mean, there was the anti-war stuff, and there was the you know, new drug community. That's why we had a crisis center, and people were looking for things to do. I mean, it was, you know, it was the outgrowth of the civil rights movement. It was the outgrowth of the Kennedy New Society stuff, and the war on poverty. All of that was, you know, kind of giving people, especially young people, the idea that they needed to be more cause oriented, and so that's what they did. Yeah. So anyway, in Crossroads at that point, we had the pantry. We've always had the pantry. I think the pantry was here, and then they didn't really have a community organizing arm yet. That didn't start until 70 or 71, I think.
Richard Mail?
No, it started before Richard Mail, and Mail sort of inherited what was the fledgling part of that. He was the one that really brought it to, you know, built it up. But I think there were community organizing efforts here before that. He came in 73. I think the Union of the Poor preceded him, and you know, they had some knockaround stuff going on, but they didn't really get going until Mail was here. I think the likes of Dick Lodmell and Dan Locke, and I've forgotten the name of, there was a Chicago board organizer who came with them, and another guy, and there were 4 of them, and I think that they got to that nucleus after Mail got here, but I think it started before he did.
Oh, yeah. So have you been on the board? Were you a director?
I've done all things at Crossroads. You know, I've cleaned the laboratories. I've worked briefly in the pantry. I'm not very good at that. I was the board chair for a while, for the better part of a year. I was the director after I was the board chair, because we had a resignation from our then director, Jeff Fox. And so I took over, and then that's when we hired Glenn Bailey. I didn't want to be the director, and I didn't want to be the board chair either. But I was those things. That was 89 and 90, I think, 91, something like that. Yeah. Do you know the story about Glenn Bailey getting the job?
No.
Oh, this is. I don't know if you want to put this on film or not, but
We do.
but he told a fib. We were looking for a director, and we thought if you had to be president of the United States, to be president you have to be 30 years old. And we thought to have a director you had to be 30 years old. And we asked him if he was 30 years old, and he said, "Oh yes, I am. I'm just 30 years old." And it turned out that he wasn't 30 years old. That we found out years later that he was 29, and well, the rest is history. Since he's been here 99 years since we hired him.
He grew into the
He
position.
grew into the position. Yeah. No, we went out of our way. Glenn had been here before, as you know, and we wanted him to be. And he moved, I think, because his wife was going to graduate school, and so they moved to Chicago. His then wife, and but the nucleus of people who are here, including myself and 8 or 9 others, all said off the record, we want to recruit him back. They asked me if I wanted to be director, and I said no, I didn't want to be director. And so we opened the recruiting, but before we opened the recruiting, we made sure he wanted to apply, and he did. And he was underage, but we still hired him.
That's great. So how do you see Crossroads today as compared to 75 or 80? How has it evolved, or what's a fundamental difference or similarity?
Well, I think Crossroads is largely the same. It's stronger by far, probably magnitude of 5, 6, or 10 times stronger, really.
In terms of people or money, or?
Well, I think history, reputation, financially, the organization is stronger. The people working community issues and working the social service side are all stronger.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had, it used to be people would be at Crossroads for a year or two, because I was here twice before this last time. I've been here 20 years, 15 years this time, and was here 5 years in just a few months the first time I was here. And so we've had people that have stayed and made a career at Crossroads. We've seen our financial support grow. I think we're considered one of the 2 or 3 only credible witnesses on a range of social equity issues. On hunger we certainly are, and on healthcare we certainly are, on various consumer issues we are, and people come to us for help on those things. Sometimes just individuals, and sometimes institutions. So, but 50 years ago, Crossroads was like many other startup nonprofit organizations. Its funding was uneven, and it was difficult to get things going, and people left soon. There were, you talk about directors like Rich Mail, he came and went. He wanted to go someplace, I think, that wasn't quite as hard to work. It was very difficult to keep things going. There was a time when Mail was here when he wanted to close the food pantry.
Because no money? Or?
Well, because of no money, and because of where it was, he wanted to keep the building for other things, not for a food pantry. We were doing some of our clothing. Now, I think before our thrift store opened, before Virginia Parmalee had it over on, 8th East, that is it 8th East or 6th East? 6th East. And it was difficult to run it. We were running it kind of out of our back door here. So getting all those things sorted out and, formulated, and, as it was with, like with the thrift store, Virginia was the soul of that. She kept it going. I mean, it became her life's mission to help people that way. And so I think we've kind of arrived and have been the size we are for 10 or 12, 15 years now, with the thrift store and the pantry and the different social services we offer and the social issues we work on. So that's made Crossroads, we're really an independent voice, really quite independent. And unfortunately now, because a lot of the resources that used to be available, both private and public resources for working with low-income people, just aren't there. And Crossroads has made that commitment. We've kept that commitment strong over all this time. Yeah. So that's the difference between then and now. Over time, our commitment has been strong. I don't think we've got any more people, probably less, working on issues than we've had in the past. And the staff has always been 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that, 8 to 12 people. And that's about where we're at.
But just more credibility due to the fact that we've been around so long, and that we don't go away, that it's a stick-to-itiveness
and
it's a lasting.
Yeah, and as long as, say, the health care reform thing has been going on, and we've had, someone as good as Bill Tibbetts working that issue primarily, it gives you a lot of credibility because he's there on a steady basis. We're not making grand pronouncements of what needs to be done. We're talking about, one part or another of it to help the issue along. Sometimes we're in with a broader coalition. Just as often as not, we're giving our individual voice. It's always in harmony with other things, but you can tell that it's our clear opinion, not someone else's. Yeah.
And what's your main issue?
My main issue is housing. I still do some utilities, but my main issue is housing. And like everyone else at Crossroads who works issues, I work on whatever needs help. I mean, sometimes, on the healthcare issue, we wanted to get something started for this legislative session, so Bill and I and Bill Germanson all went to an appointment with the legislative leadership and got things spinning the right way. But that's not what I do. I do housing primarily, and then utilities as an issue. I used to work as a utility consumer advocate for the state, so that's something I have, for better or worse, some experience with. Yeah.
What about the low-income housing in downtown Salt Lake? You were the voice for that one particular building that. Did it come down, or it was?
Oh, it's down now. That was the single-room occupancy hotels that were on State Street. And the city, for whatever combination of reasons, bought those properties. Like this all transpired starting like 5 and 6 years ago. And the city had bought those properties to preserve the low-income housing there on State Street. They bought them, but they didn't know what the hell to do with them, and they were maintained marginally. And we knew that the city. We went to a couple of meetings, and it was obvious that the redevelopment agency, under poor leadership, I must say, wanted to tear them down. They wanted to turn that into kind of a garden park apartment condominium complex with commercial interest businesses on the street floor.
Still protecting low-income housing, or they got rid of that idea?
Well, it had a long and circuitous history, and by the time they finally got to the final plan, they said originally it was going to cost $20 to $30 million. I may have these figures a little bit wrong, but a little off. But they were going to build. They were going to preserve there was an old theater there that was at that point an art gallery, and it had been used for the Olympics. And so some of this survived because they needed the buildings for the 2002 Olympics. Then we got involved about 5 years later when they were still struggling, and they were talking about tearing it down. And we thought, well, if we can get the Historical Society interested in preserving the theater, and we can get the low-income advocates interested in preserving the housing, and there still is a historical building on the back street behind it. This is State Street, and then there's another street called Floral Street. The reason it's called Floral Street, which is in the mid-block, right behind the old SROs, is that there was another building, which is a two-story building that was one of the first florists in Utah on Floral Street, of course. Oh. And they had the State Historical Society has a plaque on the building saying it's a historical site. And so we had those three causes going, and it just caused all kinds of disruption with the city redevelopment agency, and we of course helped that along. And we had depends upon which, they had 3 hotels there, and they closed one, and they were maintaining the other 2, but they weren't doing an especially good job of it. But we got there about the time that they still had the 2, and there were about 50 to 60 units, and most of them were occupied. This is, when you say single room occupancy, it means people are renting them by the week and sometimes by the month. But it wasn't cheap. It was like $600. It'd be $150 a week or $600 a month, and it was a little less expensive if you rented monthly than it was by the week. And this was where people, if they had some money or their Social Security check had come in and they had $600, they would go rent at the hotel for a week so they could stay inside and dry out and take a bath or take a shower, and then a week later they would be homeless again. They'd be on the street because their money had been spent. But and at one time, this was an issue that goes back, for example, on the Crossroads history. Crossroads had worked with several of the advocacy groups locally 20 and 30 years ago when they started tearing down all of the kind of transitory housing, the so-called single-room occupancy hotels, and there used to be about 1,400, 1,500 units downtown in Salt Lake that were occupied, and people were coming and going and living there on a regular basis. But as the city is redeveloped downtown, and as those buildings got older and more out of condition, couldn't be occupied safely anymore, the city tore them down. And part of our issue was to say, well, the city has a commitment. The city said that they were going to buy these. There was like 150 units in the SROs, and we said, well, if you're going to keep them, you bought them to preserve them. You have to preserve them. If you're going to build a new complex there, you should have affordable, low-income affordable housing in there. And you could probably get some. You probably need to sustain the rent cost by making some kind of contribution, either money from the RDA to help build it. Well, all of that was on the docket when they first started building over there, and they started building, I think, in 2012, and it's still a hole in the ground because it doesn't do to go through the whole problem, legacy of problems they have on that site. But I mean, most of the low income units are gone from that plan, and they had to put in parking, and that's one of the requirements, and that ran the costs up. And then they found out that preserving the floral shop and doing the theater thing were going to be more expensive than they thought, and it built and built, and now the place is probably at least double the cost, maybe more than that. So what they start out with at $30 million, say, is now $65 or $70 million. And
but the intent is still to provide low income or SROs.
well, the intent is to still keep the floral house, which was low income housing, because they were renting that for like I don't know, less than $400 a month to the. There were 2 apartments in there. On each side it was $400, and then they were going to build some low income, but I don't know that there's. I haven't seen the plans. I haven't seen their plans for better than a year. Last I saw, there were a few, but not many. Originally, there were about 40 units, something like that. 40 units of lower income housing, rental housing. Yeah.
So in downtown Salt Lake or in the area, we've gone from 1,400 SROs
to probably less than 200, and that's the city has stuff that they supplement. They have units over in the Palmer Court, which is the homeless court over on between 9th and 10th South on State Street, or on Main Street. They have another hotel that's down just around the corner from the homeless shelter, and that's all supplemented. That's all federally subsidized Section 8 transitional housing, but probably with that less than 100 units. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
could you name a best moment or event in your tenure with Crossroads?
Oh wow. You know, they're kind of transitory because you do something, you think, wow, that's great, and you turn around and it's not there anymore, or it's changed, or you move on. You don't celebrate for very long because there's always something else gnawing at you. You know, we've had good victories. I would say that it's always been a mix between what's happening in Salt Lake City, because we're Salt Lake City located, and then working at the state legislature has been, and then we have a variety of federal issues we work on. We don't take on all the federal housing issues, but we take on things like preserving the Section 8 program. That's the Section 8 is the voucher assistance that people can get if they qualify. And in Utah, people don't know, but Utah, it's about 1 out of 8 or 9 people who qualify actually get some assistance that way, and nationally it's 1 out of 4. So we've always been, Utah's always been a laggard when it comes to really taking care of its poor people. So the big victories are kind of further in between than they used to be. But I think we have done some good things in the past in terms of getting the state housing trust fund established, and that trust fund has been there for better than 20 years now, and has contributed not a great amount of money, not an adequate amount of money, but has contributed money to building or rehabbing affordable housing for people. So people come in and apply, and there's a state committee that oversees that, and they provide money that goes in, and they use that money to help build the package that you need to finance lower income housing. And there's been a lot done that way. That trust fund could be a lot stronger than it has been. And there will be legislation this time to change it and make it stronger and make it more responsive to homeless needs as well, to lower and they've tried to make it a loan fund where it should be a grant fund. So that's a mixed thing, but it's been there for, I think, 23 or 24 years, and has something of a legacy fund now, something in the $50 to $70 million range of money that they're turning over every year. We've always thought that it probably needed $250 million in their investment fund to make it work. So the state's always lagged on that, been reluctant to fund it. We've been successful on national issues in helping to get people like the U.S. Senator Bob Bennett became a real advocate for the Section 8 program. He wasn't aware of it. We took him on a tour of Section 8 housing in downtown Salt Lake, right like a block away from his federal building office on State Street, and he was amazed and greatly pleased to know that the federal money was being spent. We had a meeting with him at St. Mark's, and St. Mark's is right there, of course, on First South, and all the people he was meeting with were from like within 2 blocks of downtown Salt Lake, and we had maybe 8 or 9 consumers there, and he was completely moved. He became a very quiet but active supporter for that funding. The rest of the time he was in. This was maybe 8 years before he left the Senate, so he was he was someone, and he and his staff were someone we could talk to and get things done. He would move things as a Republican in the Republican majority in the Senate at that point, and he moved. We could call his people or call him or go meet with him, and we had a really we thought quiet but effective relationship with that U.S. Senator. We've had some good things happen with Senator Hatch as well over time, and his Senator Hatch has supported the supplement that welfare families can get to help with their it's like an income assistance you can get, and it's helped pull a lot of people out of poverty. But the reason he was supportive of that was he's had a long contact with Crossroads, and in fact Jeff Fox, the former director here, at one point had Senator Hatch as the he and former Governor Matheson co-sponsored a fundraising letter at Christmas time for Crossroads and signed it, and it got sent out to more people than you can count. It was pretty successful. So things like that are, heartening. Yeah.
And they all know you now.
Well, no, it's really interesting. I don't think, we very seldom have had, heroes at Crossroads from the staff side. It's always been a collaboration, and you wanted to be smart enough to keep your head down and your nose out of the camera, and have other people taking credit and responsibility for what they should be doing to begin with. And that gets really kind of touchy at points. Sometimes you have to stand up and make noise and thump people on the forehead to get their attention, but boy, we do a massive amount of good things without ever putting our name on it. I mean, I think if you wanted one thing overall that's maybe people don't think this way, but maybe they're not thinking as community advocates and community organizers. But when you do that sort of work, you have to keep your own selfish self out of it and put the people who are most affected, the people who you're really trying to help, you have to put them in the limelight, and you have to put the people who think they're rescuing them in the limelight, so that everyone takes credit and everyone feels some ownership of what's happening. Um, and that's really satisfying when you see that happen. And we'll eventually see something like with this housing boom, for instance, in Salt Lake, and they're building all of these um, expensive apartments right here in this very neighborhood. And the people who are affected by that are being moved out. I mean, we used to look out there and you could see the funny little apartments on Green Street, and they're all gone now. They were all affordable, and some of them had large continuous families coming and going with lots of kids. But that housing is gradually disappearing, and the corridors along the transit corridor, the hotels that have been built, the motels, I'm sorry, not the motels, the apartment buildings, and some condominium construction, but mostly apartments. And those are apartments that are only affordable to people who are lucky enough to have good paying jobs and want to live downtown and be closer to where they're working. They're not riding, by the way, they're not riding the tracks trains. They're commuting to work just like most people do. And their apartments aren't affordable for the people we work for. And but eventually that will come back. I think we feel good about things that happen, that we can have some we can see something better happening with, for instance, the new mayor is a person who has, I think, a better variety of experience in terms of people who don't have enough. And she will be more responsible than the previous mayor was in terms of what it takes to make sure that when you build an apartment that's got 150 units in it, that the city has resources and they have programs that can go into those units and help put, say, 10 or 20 units in that building of 150 apartments, 10 or 20 units that are affordable to low-income people. And they'd be affordable as long as that building's there, say 50 to 75 years. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things we're working on now, and I've been making noise about since a year and a half ago. And it'll probably take another year and a half before we see any real progress on that, but that's what it takes. And that's the good thing about Crossroads, is that rather than just going from firestorm to firestorm, we've been able to, over 50 years, learn how to maintain the effort. And the real question will be, how does Crossroads do that in the future? Will Crossroads be smart enough when I'm not here, and when Glenn Bailey's not here, and when Bill Tibbetts might not be here? Will it be smart enough to keep doing that the same way? And I think it will. I think that Crossroads is the great thing about having a director who stays on and believes in working with the people and putting them first. People you're serving